Hello everybody, welcome back to Gaming Trials. Overwatch League Season 3 2020 is right around the corner, and I think it's time to do a power rankings video. I love watching Overwatch League, and I think this is just an interesting way to determine which teams are going to be good and which teams are going to be bad, and to see how wrong you are inevitably at the end of the season. Before I begin, I don't watch much more professional Overwatch other than the Overwatch League, so most of the changes that people have made to their rosters, I can only determine how good and bad they are based on other power rankings that I've watched and how people have discussed other teams. That being said, I have various other power rankings that I have watched and how people compare some of the teams right here with who did them below or next to the rankings themselves. My ranking is going to be pretty different. So I'm going to split this up into 3 tiers. Tier 1 are going to be the people that I believe are going to make the playoffs and don't have to play in the play-ins, or 1 through 6th. Tier 2, I think, are going to be people that are going to have to play in the play-ins, which is 7th through 12th. And Tier 3 are going to be people that I think are going to just miss the play-ins all the way down to the, I guess you could say, trash teams. Before we understand where we're going to rank these teams, we do have to look at the divisions, of course. Boston, Florida, Atlanta, Houston, London, New York, Philly, Paris, Toronto, and Washington make up the Atlantic Division, and will play each other twice in the normal season, with them playing the people in the Pacific Division once. Chengdu, Dallas, Guangzhou, Hangzhou, the 2 LA teams, San Francisco, Seoul, Shanghai, and Vancouver make up the Pacific Division and will face each other twice, while facing everyone in the Atlantic once. This is important because when you consider which teams are better than which other teams, you have to also consider who's playing who and how many times are they playing each other. Now, if I say that San Francisco is better than Seoul, and I say Philly is better than San Francisco, that doesn't necessarily matter. San Francisco is going to be playing Seoul twice. They're only going to lose to Philly once. Now, both of those examples aren't necessarily ideal. I don't believe that Philly is better than San Francisco, but that's just an example. So let's start off with number 20. And if you paused on the rankings that I showed you, pretty much everyone, me included, is going to be putting Boston at rank 20. From what I've heard and from what I can theorize on, Boston's not going to be that strong. I do think they have the potential to move up a couple of places, but I think overall, Boston's probably going to be in last place. For number 19, people have been putting the Valiant down at number 19. I don't think that's going to be the case. In fact, I think I'd probably lean more towards Paris being in 19. And that the people for Paris might be mad at me, but I don't think their roster offers enough for me to make Paris be really, really high. Granted, I do think that they may be able to beat out some of the other people that are going to be above them, but I think that consistency is going to play a big role in Paris. If they can be consistently good, I see them moving up, but I don't see the consistency being there. So, yeah. I'm going to put Toronto next. The Defiant they looked pretty bad in Season 2, but they mainly looked bad at the end of Season 2. So, I see that Toronto is going to be better than Paris. They also have to face Paris twice. They also have to face Boston twice. I do think that Boston and Paris could potentially beat Toronto if they're having a bad day. Also, if Boston and Paris are having a good day. But I think if everything's considered average, I think Toronto will probably be able to beat Boston and Paris most of the time. And so now we have to get to number 17, and I am going to put the Mayhem down. So the Florida Mayhem, they made some pretty good roster changes. I'll give them that. But the Mayhem has, every time they've made a roster change in between each season, they still don't necessarily perform to the level that I think people want them to perform at. And that's kind of tough to call. I think they've got a better chance of scoring higher on this list if their entire new roster practically, it's half and half. Their roster is half of what it was last year and half new. If their roster can meld together and form one good cohesive unit, I think they can place higher. But for now, I think Florida 17 is probably about as high as I can place them reasonably. Next, I think I'm going to have to go with probably the Houston Outlaws. So, Houston Outlaws haven't seemed kind of like wow factor from me. I think they've made a couple different additions to the team, but I don't know how well that's actually going to work out for them in the end. So, can't say right now. I think Houston could honestly even fall lower than where they are, depending on the strength of Florida and Toronto. I think they'll probably beat out Paris and Boston. 15. I think when we talk about going up from here, I'm probably going to have to put London down. I wanted to put London higher. I really did. I can't make a great argument for London. They replaced their entire roster, I do believe. And I don't think, because we haven't seen them play in the Overwatch League level, I don't think we can put them much higher. Even if they are all pretty good players, I don't see it being enough. And at 14, I am going to put the Washington Justice. The Washington Justice made some roster changes, yeah. I don't have all the roster changes up. I really should have. But the Washington Justice just seemed like a team that could benefit from hero pools, because we also have to consider that hero pools are coming. So if your team isn't that flexible, then that pushes you down the list. And Washington, I think, has some pretty good DPS players, but I think at the end of the day, I don't think they'll be able to adapt quick enough to any given meta that may occur from hero pools to push them up the list. I do think that they're good enough to beat out some of the lower teams on this list, but I don't think they'll be able to adapt quick enough to really compete at higher levels of play. I'm going to put Dallas at 13. Just outside. Just outside of the top 12. And a lot of people have Dallas farther down. But I think they are probably going to be able to get a good coaching staff. Or I think their coaching staff's going to be good enough to where they can pull off some pretty good wins during the season, but I don't see them making playoffs just because some of the other competition is just too much, and they're going to lose a lot of matches that way. They are in the Pacific Division and have to go up against Chengdu, Guangzhou, Hangzhou, San Francisco Shock, Shanghai Dragons, and the Vancouver Titans twice each. Most of the people that are at the bottom are in the Atlantic Division. So they do only have to face all those people that I just listed once, but they also have to face each other twice. And I see many of them going 1-1 with each other, and then possibly a couple of them going 2-0 or 0-2 to each other, depending how the metas unfold, depending on what the meta is that week. Because when hero pools come, I think that'll definitely shake it up. But we got, in our last 8 spots, 7 people, 7 teams from the Atlantic Division out of 10, and then 1 team from the Pacific Division out of 10. Now we get into Tier 2 teams, which I think are going to make the play-ins. And I think Chengdu probably be 12. So let's write that down. And Chengdu benefits a little bit from hero pools, because then once double shield isn't able to be played, I think you'll see Chengdu do a little better in weeks where double shield isn't played, because they're very good at DPS, but I don't think that they're going to be able to handle I don't think they're going to be handling double shield very well at the start of the season, because that's probably what we're going to see at the start of the season is probably a variation of Orisa Sigma, May Reaper with possibly some Doomfist in there, and maybe Batiste, and I don't know what other support you would throw in there. Lucio, Batiste, that doesn't sound right. I just don't think that they're going to do well when the season starts, and they might do better once hero pools get added. But I think the start of their season is going to be a little rough, so I'm going to put them down at 12. 11. I'm going to put I got to put the Valiant down next. The LA Valiant at number 11. Now, a lot of people have put Valiant down at 19. And I believe they also changed their entire roster, but I am unsure. I think the LA Valiant are going to surprise a lot of people. People are putting them near the bottom, and I just don't think that's going to happen. Then again, I also rooted for the Valiant in Season 1 from the beginning of the season, and they ended up placing second, but then they dropped down dramatically. So, we'll see. But I think the Valiant, number 11, I think they've made some good changes. I think it'll pay off by the end of the year. Now we're at the top half. I'm going to put, and this is going to be crazy, but I'm going to put the Vancouver Titans down at number 10. And now, I don't want to say this because it's probably going to backlash in my face, but I don't think Vancouver is going to do very well this season. Definitely nowhere near the level that we saw from them in Season 2 of the Overwatch League. And that's just because GOATS is no longer a thing. Like, they were, at least at the start of the season, they were the very best at GOATS. And towards the middle of the season, everyone can probably say that the San Francisco Shock passed them up and they were the best at GOATS. And then Vancouver was second. But with GOATS gone, and them trading away Bumper, they have Fissure now. Fissure is the main thing that keeps me from putting them higher. If they would have gotten a really solid main tank to replace Bumper that wasn't Fissure, I think I would probably put them probably in the top 6 at the very least. But Fissure has been on multiple teams and has left every single team. So I don't see it. And Fissure, I think, is now the only main tank for Vancouver. So I think that that's just going to end up biting them in the butt. And I think they're going to underperform for when either A, Fissure eventually leaves, or if they take a loss streak of like 2, there's going to be a mental shift for the Vancouver, and I don't think they'll be able to recover enough to the point where they're going to make the playoffs. I honestly think that they have the potential to make the playoffs. I just think that depending on how it works with Fissure, they're either going to be in the middle of the pack or they're going to be towards the top. But I don't think they're going to do that this well this season. Coming in at number 9, and I personally don't want to put them here because I love them to death, but I'm going to have to put the Hangzhou Spark. The Hangzhou Spark hasn't made practically any changes whatsoever to their team over the break. And their team worked well. I think they got one player just to help round them out. I think they're going to do okay. I think they'll make the play-ins. I think they'll have a chance to take the title. But I don't see them placing realistically any higher than 9th. As much as I want them to, because I love the Hangzhou Spark, I can't place them any higher because it's just not realistic. I'm gonna go with the Guangzhou Charge next as my number 8. The Guangzhou Charge, they're very good with DPS players. They've always been really good at using DPS strategies. Like Guangzhou and Chengdu kind of share DPS styles in a way. I think they're very good at that, but I foresee them doing very well this season. But I don't think they're going to be doing well enough to beat some of the heavier contenders. I think once they find themselves up against the more tough opponents like Shanghai Dragons, New York Excel, San Francisco Shock, I think they're just going to fall a little short. Even in metas that might be more favorable to DPS strategies. Just because I think the caliber of the teams above are just too much for the Guangzhou Charge. There are chances for them to take maps and potentially games off of them, but I just don't foresee it happening. And to round out the Tier 2, the team that I think is just going to barely miss out on making the playoffs by coming in 6th or higher, I'm going to have to go with the Gladiators. I think we're going to go with the Gladiators here. And I think the Gladiators are good. They're a good team. They play solidly. I just don't find it possible for them to place any higher. You know, I think the competition is just slightly too steep. And with that being said, that runs out Tier 2. So now we have to go to the Tier 1 teams that are probably going to make the playoffs this year. And at the bottom, we're going to have to put Seoul. I don't want to put Seoul there, but it's really tough. The competition that's going to be above Seoul from the changes that the teams have made, it's rough for Seoul. I don't see them coming higher than 6th. And Gladiators could potentially place slightly higher than Seoul, depending on how the season plays out and the metas at the time of the matches. But we'll see. So number 5th, I'm going to put the Shanghai Dragons. Shanghai went from 0-40 in Season 1 to a pretty decent team in Season 2. I think they came in 8th overall. I don't remember what they actually came in overall, but they did play pretty well once they started getting wins, and they made the play-in tournament, but they got eliminated by London. So they also took a stage title in Stage 3, I believe. They had to beat San Francisco, Vancouver, and NYXL back to back to back. So this proves that they can hang with the top of the league. So I think they deserve to be in the top 5. But obviously we did have a meta shift. But I think that Shanghai going to be pretty solid all around. And there's almost no confusing this, but 4th place is going to be Philly. The Fusion are solid. They look solid. And they added a couple of specialists to their team, main one being Chipsa. I think they're going to do very well. Not much I really have to say about that. Moving on to number 3 is going to be the Atlanta Reign. Surprise, surprise. Not really. Atlanta has a really strong team, a really solid core, and has made some really good changes. They also they were the ones that took Shock into the losers bracket in the finals, in the double elimination tournament. Granted, after losing to Atlanta, they just then swept literally everybody until they won the Overwatch League. But yeah, And now, this is where people are going to probably argue with me the most. I'm going to put the Shock at number 2 and the NYXL at number 1. San Francisco is strong. NYXL is strong. Those two teams are probably going to be the top 2 teams. Unless Atlanta comes out and just starts blowing everybody out of the water. San Francisco and New York are not in the same division, so they only have to play each other once. That might be the deciding factor of who is on top and who is on the bottom. Because I foresee them defeating practically every other opponent that stands in their way. But I do think that teams like Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Shanghai have the potential to upset the New York and the San Francisco Shock. That being said, Atlanta and Philadelphia are in New York's division, whereas Shanghai is the only one that's in San Francisco's division, meaning that New York has really more opportunities to get upset than Shock does, but I do think that Shock is more likely to get upset than NYXL. NYXL, from their birth, has been a solid team and will continue to be a solid team. We have seen Shock choke quite a bit. When the series go on longer, mainly in their series against Shanghai, they're just not able to give just enough to win. They were able to pull out a perfect stage in stage 3. Or it was stage 2. I think it was stage 3. They didn't drop a single map. However, at that time, there was no one, not a single person that Shock faced that could stand up to what they could do. I do not believe that they faced Atlanta during that time. Not that I don't think it would have mattered anyways, because they were still in GOATS. And at that point, Shock was the best GOATS team, and it was undeniable at that point. So, these are my power rankings. We have NYXL, followed by Shock, then Atlanta, Philadelphia, Shanghai, and Seoul to round out the people that I think are going to be in the playoffs by placing high in the top 6. Then we have Gladiators, followed by Guangzhou, Hangzhou, Vancouver, Valiant, and Chengdu. In the teams that are going to make the play-ins, but not quite get there in terms of skill to make it into the top and just make their way into the playoffs just out of pure skill. They'll have to earn it. And then finally, in Tier 3, the teams that I think are going to just miss out this season are Dallas, Washington, London, Houston, Florida, Toronto, Paris, and then Boston at the bottom. This is pretty different, I think, with the exception of like the top 6 teams. Most people tend to agree on the top 6 teams, or at least people place those teams close to the top 6. But the further down you get from my list, until you get down to Boston, the more different this list seems. And I think I'm proud of this list. I think this list might actually be more accurate. I think the people that we're sleeping on are going to surprise us, and the people that we're just putting above the people that we're sleeping on are going to disappoint us. And I think that this is probably going to be what we see, potentially, unless something major happens and a team just starts blowing people out of the water. After watching all the teams play for a little bit, a couple of games for each of them. I think I'm going to post another rankings. Not necessarily going to change where I put them. I'm going to try to figure out what their record is going to be for every single team at the end of the season. And potentially throw in map differential as well. But while we're here, I'd like to point out that Saturday we do have 4 matches going up, which is technically tomorrow. So we have Toronto versus Paris. We have London versus NYXL. We have Gladiators versus Vancouver. And we have the Valiant versus Dallas. Toronto versus Paris could go either way. I have them both near the bottom. I don't know how this is going to go. So I think Paris will beat Toronto. Even though I have them placed lower, I think Paris is going to get beaten by the Toronto Defiant. I think NYXL is going to come out and just batter London to pieces. I'm sorry. I know that's not what you want to hear, but London is probably going to get clapped by NYXL. LA Gladiators versus Vancouver Titans. They're pretty close in my standings. It depends on how well Fissure is in with the group when they start. I think potentially Gladiators have the chance to beat Vancouver here. And if they do beat Vancouver, I think we might see a pattern emerge. And Vancouver is going to start suffering early on. And then we have Valiant versus Fuel. Valiant and Fuel aren't too far away in my standings, so realistically, either one can beat each other. I want to believe that Valiant's going to beat Dallas, but you can never be too sure. Then we have Sunday that rolls along, where we have London versus Paris, Boston versus New York, Valiant versus Vancouver, and Shock versus the Fuel. Alright, let's just say this straight up. I think Boston is going to get decked by New York again. I think both New York's victories, because now they're removing the you have to play 4 games rule. If you get 3 wins in a row, you win the series. I think New York 3-0 is both London and Boston. Boston is criticized as being the weakest team this season, so I think they're just going to get absolutely demolished. If Boston comes out and beats NYXL and then plays very well in their very next match as well, I think Boston moves up the power rankings quite a bit because they're looking like the worst team, so I think NYXL 3-0's Boston. Paris Eternal, I think they lose to London. I have faith in London. I think they lose to Paris. I think they beat Paris. They either beat them 3-0 or 3-1. I don't think it goes to a 5th map. As for Valiant versus Vancouver, if Gladiators beats Vancouver, then I think Valiant will beat Vancouver as well. I know I have them above the thing, but if Gladiators beat Vancouver, and they really beat Vancouver, like it's not like a 3-2 loss. If they win 3-1 or 3-0, Vancouver may struggle to recover, and they might lose to Valiant as well. Then again, I do think that Vancouver will probably be Valiant, if that's not the case. If they suffer a close loss against the Gladiators, but then they'll probably beat Valiant. And I don't know the score of which that will be. And then San Francisco Shock versus Dallas Fuel. The Shock are solid. The Dallas are not as solid. I think the Shock 3-0 the Dallas Fuel. I'm sorry. That's just my take. And that is the first week of matches. So take that what you will. So to start off the week, we have NYXL 2-0. We have Paris down, I think, 0-2. We have Toronto up 1-0. We have Boston down 0-1. Gladiators, I don't know. Valiant, I'm going to go with the safe option and say that they're going to be 1-1 after the first week. San Francisco 1-0 and Dallas Fuel 1-1, or actually 0-2. Dallas Fuel 0-2. Gladiators is the only one I don't know. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to debate in the comments down below what you liked about my power rankings, what you didn't like about my power rankings, and why. Then again, this is also based on my opinion and bias and what I've gathered from other people doing power rankings. So I don't think that this is the best power rankings. I do feel like it's a pretty okay one. I think that people tend to really hard place bad teams lower, and I tried not to do that. Like, I didn't want Florida to be so low. People put Florida higher for the most part than where I've put them. But I just can't. I can't put Florida higher. They always let people down. Anyways, catch you all later. Peace.